Okay.
I got it. Yeah, it says recording in my top left-hand screen.
So what I will make an effort to do is speak to the camera and not the screen today.
Okay.
Right now I'm looking at Richard and I'm looking down, aren't I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look at the little dot. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not too effective. So I'm going to minimize you and put everybody at the near the mic.
Good morning, sir. You've got your Philip, are you got your video on?
There we go.
There we go. Lon's on. There's Lon.
Interesting. There we
So
go.
So there you go. You got your team there, Brian.
Yeah.
Good morning, guys.
Morning.
Morning.
I'll just reiterate what I had thought we'd do today, which was have I'll do a brief introduction and introduce you guys in the following order. It would be Philip, Richard, and then Richard, do I pronounce it in the Zedkin? Is that correct? I can't hear you. You're muted.
I'm sorry. Is your
Yeah. Nasedkin with an S. Nasedkin.
Nasedkin. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then following up with Lon. So Phil, you would be first up after me. And I've looked up on the International Association of Suicide Prevention website. I got a little bit of an introduction that I pulled from them, and then we'll have our discussion. And this will serve two purposes. One is which that it will be posted alone. It can be a standalone discussion that may be posted by itself and maybe on the Men's Sheds Canada website, but maybe also on Core Alberta. So it does need to stand alone. And if we do a live presentation further in September, when I get back from holiday, when maybe we'll all be around, or maybe some of us will be around, then it'll be a stand-in for an introduction to a discussion. So we'll have the recording, and then we'll be sitting around, and those of us who are present can do question answers with shedders who show up. So I see it having two purposes. Is that your vision, Punch?
Yep.
And so that means we don't need to fill up 55 minutes of recording. I think if we did a half an hour, we'd probably be doing great. If we do more, okay. And Punch tells us that he can edit it out. So should you need to have something edited out, take a pause and restart or something like that. And I said before all of you guys came on, I'm going to do my best to look at the camera, which I'm doing now when I'm talking, rather than looking at your picture, because you're down below. And when I look down, that doesn't come across quite so well. Yeah, go ahead, Punch.
Do you have something that you wanted to put on the screen?
Nope.
Okay, good. Okay.
Nope. So that's my invitation to you guys too, is to talk to your camera. It's a practiced art, and I don't have it pinned down yet. So I sometimes remember and I sometimes don't. And sometimes I'm going to read something, in which case then I'll be obviously reading it. Any question? I'm also going to, in my introduction, not just talk about the organization or the day, but I'm going to cite a couple of examples, because I think the more personal we make this about talking about suicide, I can tell somebody else how to do it, or I can do it. And so I would like to kind of set that tone, set an example of some men in my life that are now gone. Is that okay with you guys?
Mm-hmm. Well, mine is all personal.
Yes, absolutely. And so, okay. Now, Punch, you're going to have the option. It's hard for you to be invisible if you're visible. So do you want to stay on? Do you want me to acknowledge you?
No, you don't have to. No,
Well, then you should probably turn your video and audio video off.
I did.
I can still see you.
Okay, but on my screen, I can't see myself.
No, don't go to hide yourself. Just turn your whole darn video off. Because we can see you.
Okay.
There. Okay, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just making sure that recording is running.
Yeah, yeah.
And then Punch, just switch that hide yourself back off so that if you do end up having to talk, it'll be live instead of that avatar.
Right.
Okay. All right.
All right.
So I have a question. So what I put together is just under 10 minutes. Now, I'm assuming that, sort of discussion around what I've said or any of the other parts of that would follow. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, we won't have a discussion about around what you say. This will be, I think, unless I want to make a short comment or any of us does, but we'll kind of save it unless it's really pertinent. I don't know. I want to be light on my feet. So if I have a question, if you bring something up for me and I have a question, I'm going to feel free to answer it. But if we expand this into a discussion today, that means we're kind of preventing the discussion on the later when we present it in
Right.
live.
Yeah.
Live.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah.
This is your teaser session.
Yeah. I haven't done this in a way that is attempting to promote it. I think there's certainly place for it, but it doesn't need to be part of what we do today.
Yeah, yeah. And ideally, then you'll be around for our live presentation later in September, and then we can do the question answer. So
yeah.
When do you leave for your vacation or wherever you're going at the end of September?
I'm away September 4 to 15 if you're talking to me.
What about Phil?
I'm here on the 10th.
What about after the 10th?
After the 10th, I'm gone for a month on the 22nd.
You leave on the 22nd.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a window in there, Brian, from the roughly the 16th to the 22nd, 21st.
Yeah, got it. Richard, when are you back from Scotland?
I'm back in the country on the 12th or something, but I'm not back online till the 20th. I'm trying to block off 3 weeks where I can just reset. But if push comes to shove, I can be available. Kind of breaks the rule, but whatever.
Okay.
Best way to get a hold of me is my richard@nisedkin.com email.
Okay. So let's just start the conversation and see where we go. I'll be doing, and I'll only briefly introduce us as a panel after I do the opening intro. And then as an introduction to each of you as a speaker, I'll read the longer bio that I have for you.
In what order are we going on again?
We're going Phil, then yourself, and Lon's doing cleanup.
Okay.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Brian Sawyer. I'm from NCHEDS Canada, one of the co-hosts of today's presentation. And today we're talking about, well, we're not celebrating, but it's in honor of Suicide Prevention Day, which this year falls on September the 10th. And so we're going to talk a little bit about suicide. And I do want to acknowledge that we're speaking here from Treaty 6 land and traditional territories of the Métis. And we do honor that. And I want to talk a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about talking about suicide, why it's important, why it's difficult, and as a bit of an introduction, I'm gonna take some statistics from the internet. The World Health Organization estimates that more than 700,000 people die from suicide each year, and so that profoundly affects their families and communities. And suicide is a universal challenge with millions of people impacted. There is an International Association on Suicide Prevention. They've been in place since 1961, and they're dedicated to preventing suicide and suicidal behavior and alleviating its effects. And their theme for this year is called, for 24 to 26, actually 2 years, is changing the narrative on suicide. And that's about shifting from a culture of silence and a lack of understanding to more awareness of openness and empathy and support. It's also about inspiring individuals and communities and organizations and even governments to engage in open and honest discussion about suicide and suicidal behavior. It's about fostering empathy and compassion for those who are struggling, and I've known some. It means understanding that suicidal thoughts and feelings are a sign of immense pain and distress, and that talking about suicide doesn't increase the presence or the occurrence of suicide. It means listening without judgment, offering support, and guiding individuals toward help. It's crucial to recognize that the World Suicide Prevention Day is a day dedicated to raising awareness and fostering change and providing a supportive sense of community and understanding for those with lived or living experience. And of course, the Men's Shed organization, the Men's Shed movement, is all about creating community. So that leads me to our panel of men who are showing up here today. And I'm happy to share this discussion with Lon Jones from Buddy Up program, sponsored by Canadian Mental Health Association, by Richard Nazentkin, who runs a shed, started a shed and runs it very successfully in Grand Prairie, and is the co-chair of Men's Sheds, the Alberta Men's Shed Association, and Phil Hogg, who is a suicide loss survivor and is here to talk about it. I just want to share a little bit more about myself. My name is Brian Sawyer. I'm from Men's Sheds Canada. I'm also with Men's Sheds here in Edmonton and in Alberta. And as a matter of fact, we're all here in Alberta. And I want to acknowledge that Punch Jackson is also here on the call, although he's not the speaker today. He's not on the panel, but he's our background producer, and that's why you see him here. And he's been a long-time mentor to me. And my experience or my relationship with suicide goes way, way back to the time when I was young and went through all kinds of teenage angst and felt alone and isolated and misunderstood and had no one who really understood me. And I'm not going to say that I was suicidal at the time, but I sure did experience times when I had no hope of connection. Nobody seemed to really connect with me, and I felt hopeless. And I got over that, but I do understand that feeling that, well, what is there to live for if nobody in the world understands me? That formed a little bit of the basis of my understanding of how suicidal thoughts can come. And I've suffered, chronic depression throughout my life. Rarely have I felt suicidal. I have, though, on occasion, often run into men that I've met who have been, again, isolated, lonely, feeling disconnected, feeling out of touch. And a couple of them, I wrote down their names this morning because they come to mind when I talk about this topic. One of them's name is Terry. I worked next door to him in our office, and I knew that he was having struggles. And so I regularly reached out and talked to him, and he really appreciated it. And he said, yes, he was having difficulty. And he presented so positively. He was the guy who reached out and helped everybody else, but nobody ever asked him how he was doing except me. And so I kept that conversation going while I worked with him. I moved away. I eventually moved up and away to another office, and I was very, very sad to hear that he eventually took his life about 2 years later. I'm not saying it's because I left, but I realized that I made a difference by having that conversation with him. I have one other man, an acquaintance of mine that I made at university. His name was Anthony. He was Italian. He was not from this country. He was here doing some studies, and he was very expressive, an outgoing man, very happy guy, and alone. And he wanted to talk to me because I had just at the old age of 40 had a child, and he wanted a child so badly in life. And I said, yeah, let's have that discussion. Let's do it. Because he obviously he wanted a child. He wanted a family in his life. I kept saying, yeah, let's do it. I never actually did it. until I found one day, or I heard he's no longer around. He just took his life in his room. And I was so angry at myself for it would have just taken 5 minutes or half an hour to just reach out to a guy. And so that makes me wonder how many other men haven't I reached out, or how many have I reached out. But the important thing is that it took me nothing to actually reach out and talk to somebody or not. And it's a decision that I'm making all the time now, and I'm aware of it. So that's my introduction to this topic today. That's kind of the extent of my experience. Some men on this call have much more lived experience with suicide. And so I want to move on. I will be the moderator, but I do want to move on to our main set of speakers. And the first, of course, that I'd like to introduce is Phil Hogg. And again, I'm going to read this because I want to get it right. Phil Hogg is a suicide loss survivor. Phil will speak to his 13-year grief journey, resulting from his son having died by suicide. He's been a volunteer with the Canadian Mental Health Association, Edmonton region, for over 10 years, and volunteered with Tough Enough to Talk About It, the program developed by the Resource Center for Suicide Prevention in Grand Prairie. Dealing with the impact of suicide on family and friends and processing loss related to grief is what Phil will talk about. So over to you, Phil.
Thank you, Brian. So as Brian says, I've been asked to be part of this presentation to share my experience with suicide loss and what I've learned from this tragic experience. 13 long years ago, my son Alex, at the age of 24, died by suicide. And I struggle, even now, all these years later, to think back to that time of the debilitating trauma our family experienced. I can talk at length about the special person he was, his personable, sensitive nature, and his natural ability to take on and do well anything that he put his mind to. And I've come to know it's very important for me to keep his memory and spirit close and to speak of him whenever I have the opportunity. So I come today having navigated a difficult, circuitous, not necessarily progressive grief journey. And I'm not a suicide attempt survivor. So I don't know personally the circumstances that bring one to contemplate suicide. Researchers speak to the complexity of circumstances that factor into why a person may see suicide as an option. One person's account told to me the emotional pain they felt spoke to seeing their options as standing on the top of a tall burning building, the dilemma being to jump or stand and get burned. They said, I didn't want to die. I just wanted the pain to stop. Prevention starts with awareness. And to have that awareness, suicide needs to be talked about. However, suicide is such a loaded topic. It was as recently as 1972 that suicide was decriminalized in Canada. Some religions see it as a sin. Some faiths see it as a sin that precluded spiritual redemption. The phrase committed suicide comes with the negative connotation of committing a crime. Perceptions of quitter, weak, flawed, have persisted around people attempting suicide. So as a topic of discussion, suicide is a challenging subject. How we're socialized as men, as males, adds further to the challenges of discussing suicide and the underlying mental conditions. I am an example. I've been described as stoic and was raised to avoid showing my emotions. That was considered demonstrating weakness. Big boys don't cry. So the message was bury your emotions. Participating in competitive sports further hardened my shell around showing emotions other than anger and happiness. And it's one of my deepest regrets that I didn't demonstrate to my son examples of showing my emotional pain, my tears, my sadness when difficult things happened. And sadly, he didn't feel he could either. We can be objective and talk about suicide in the abstract, but if it's to be preventable, the conversation needs to go to a personal level. And for a subject as delicate as that, there needs to be a relationship between individuals to enable that conversation. How can one feel comfortable divulging personal feelings without a high level of trust that the person they're speaking with will receive that information without judgment? Family, friends, close acquaintances, fellow shedders are the obvious ones to hold that person's trust. And it's only through those relationships that behavioral clues to a person's struggles may be recognized. One way in which I've learned trust can be built in a relationship, and I've learned this the hard way, is through sharing our vulnerabilities. Conversations that go beyond, how about those Oilers, to things that touch us, emotionally. An example, sharing. I'm really sad today as my old dog isn't doing well, and I'm worried I'll have to put him down, and I just don't know how I can do that. A conversation starter like that suggests there's a safe space for other emotionally charged discussions in a relationship. I've had some of the most helpful discussions with folks that I've met through support groups who've experienced similar loss, and has often said, I can be comfortable speaking of my pain because that someone truly knows how I'm doing, truly wants to know how I'm doing. Dealing with health challenges for either yourself or a partner, struggling with finding purpose in retirement, losing friends or relatives, and other emotionally challenging events can happen to any of us. We all are dealing with stuff, so sharing helps. And this doesn't mean having a pity party. It's just being honest and human. I mentioned earlier, I've been on a 13-year grief journey. I think of my son often, many times, with heartwarming remembrances, but it's an enduring sorrow. I've come to describe the loss as an emotional amputation, and I've had to learn to cope with this ever-present absence. To survive, I've had no choice but to come to understand and be with my grief. There are so many opportunities for personal loss over a lifetime that for one to be spared grieving is rare. It's not uncommon for we men to bury our grief when confronted with it. But grief needs to be processed. Ignored, it can come out in a variety of negative ways. And I've come to understand that grief is an action word. In taking on our grief, I believe it can teach us things about ourselves that we are unaware of. The statement, I grieve the loss of, ... Likely, each of us has personal experience with an event that would finish that sentence. I believe grieving is it's just part of the human condition. There's a lot to be learned about and from grief, and for us to be open to our grief, whatever its cause, is to be more attuned to someone else's grief and grieving, and potentially enable that conversation that might make suicide prevention happen. To finish, I'd like to read a short piece by Denise Levertov entitled Talking to Grief. Ah, grief, I should not treat you like a homeless dog who comes to the back door for a crust, for a meatless bone. I should trust you. I should coax you into the house and give you your own corner. a worn mat to lie on, your own water dish. You think I don't know you've been living under my porch? You long for your real place to be readied before winter comes. You need your name, your collar, and your tag. You need the right to warn off intruders, to consider my house your own, and me your person, and yourself my own dog. And okay.
Thanks, Phil. Very touching about the grieving part. My apologies, my video was going in and out.
Was my video going in and out?
No, you were good. It was me. Luckily, it was me. You said a number of very powerful things, one of which was about mentoring your son and having that shell, which I certainly identify with. So being strong, being stoic. And we set an example of not sharing our fear or our pain. And therefore, that's something you taught your son. That's kind of what I heard you say. Very powerful. Thank you. And sharing my vulnerability. So I don't know if this makes any sense to you, Phil, but I found that in my senior years, as I get older, I care less about what other people think of me, and I'm a little more open to being more vulnerable, to actually sharing a little more about myself.
Wisdom is hard earned.
Yeah. But and the not caring about looking foolish if I say something wrong.
Yeah.
Because when I'm speaking to a man and I'm going to ask him, how are you doing? I'm taking a bit of a chance. He might push back, or he might say, well, thanks for asking. I'm really no longer concerned about whether you'll think I'm being inappropriate. It's worth it to me. So thanks very much, Phil, for sharing. Then our next speaker is Richard Nazetkin. Richard is co-chair of the Alberta Men's Shed Association, and he's a strong advocate for men's mental health in Grand Prairie, Alberta. After learning to work with mental illness himself, he saw a gap for men that had time on their hands. Either from a disability or retirement or separation, he sees developing a common sense of community and a healthy fraternity as crucial for men's health in general. I can't help but agree. He has been a facilitator of a men's peer support group for 9 years and started the Men's Shed in Grand Prairie 5 years ago. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Brian. I just want to pick up on what Philip said about wisdom is hard earned. And the thing that I've been realizing in the last maybe 3 or 4 months is that there's a cycle, and I think it's a grief cycle, and I think you can have a spectrum of grieving the loss or the like your favorite truck, and you end up selling it or it's in an accident, and then it could become a pet, and then it can be death. But there's always a grieving, there's always a letting go. And if we allow ourselves to be in that cycle, I really believe that that's where wisdom comes from. And I think as we get older as men, and that wisdom is from that lived experience of those cycles of letting go of things, letting go of our jobs, letting go of our children, maybe letting go of a relationship, and then being able to step out of that cycle to move on without diminishing whatever that process was. And I think that the furthest end of that spectrum is that unexpected death by suicide that leaves so many questions for people. My approach here at the Men's Shed has been about that sharing vulnerabilities that Philip talked about, and that building up of trust. And I think one of the most corrosive things that makes trust wear down is sarcasm. And something that we're trying to really foster within our shed is there's a level of sarcasm that can be witty and that can be humorous. And then there's also a level of sarcasm that just shuts down a conversation. And so from a shed's perspective, when a guy brings up something And sometimes those things, when they bring up something like a dog that's you're wondering about end of life for your dog, and another guy can just go, well, I have a 22 as a response. And so then there's a dry, dark laugh, and then the conversation is killed. Like there is no way to build that conversation. And so when we talk about the things that Philip brought up with building trust and trying to bring it back into the men's shed environment, that trust is really, really sacred, and it's really important. And so when that guy comes in to the shed, and the emphasis is that fraternity, that friendship, and that you're just to come as you are and where you are, and then join us and get to know people. We're not going to be putting you to work. We're not going to be having any extra expectations on you, but we're just providing a space. And it's a space that I like to call a brave space. I know that there's the concept of safe space has a really specific connotation that is very well needed in our society today. And men's sheds is a safe space, but it's also a brave space. It's a place where guys can, I can't let my hair down, but some guys are able to let their hair down. They're able to relax. They're maybe able to just be that little bit more vulnerable. But it's not going to happen the moment they walk in, although sometimes it does. Usually it's after 2 or 3 visits, and then they start to bring up what they're talking about. I have 3 examples of that safety, and they're not around suicide. They're around other health issues. And one guy used to bring in a flat of pop all the time, and he was donating the flat of pop, and it was really nice to have the flat of pop. But one of the other guys who is a little bit, well, not a little bit, he's probably morbidly obese, and he's been working out at he's been swimming weekly and 5 days a week, actually. And so the one guy said, hey, you got to stop bringing that pop in. This is not a place for all of that sugar. And the other guy was like, well, what's the difference? And so then they ended up having a conversation about diabetes. And the one gentleman was able to say, look, like if you want to look like me or end up like me, seeing specialists on a monthly basis, this is the first step in a long step.
Now Richard has frozen up.
Happen in a pub, and they don't happen at work. And I just got an internet connection unstable, sorry. So those kinds of conversations don't happen in a pub, and they don't happen at work, and they don't necessarily come up on the golf course or something like that. And so where the men's shed can come in is that there's time and there's this organic ability to build up conversations. Another example that I would use is one of the gentlemen has an inguinal hernia. So men, because of their testes coming down out of their bodies as babies, have a larger space down there, and lots of men end up with these little hernias, and parts of their guts come out through that that hernia area. And one of the guys finally felt safe enough to start to bring this up, and then somebody else suggested a garter type prosthetic that would help to hold everything in there. And you know what? If you can have conversations like that, that's trust. That's where we've got a space that feels where people can be brave enough to bring up these things. And so then the next natural step is when we're talking about suicide prevention. And I think we need to be very careful to be conscious of changes of behavior. So if there's a guy coming in and there's a significant change in behavior, you don't just say, hey, how's it going? Or what's up with you? But you create a space, that brave space. You allow that spot where you can maybe not be distracted, invite them out for coffee, and just say, like, describe the behavior that you're observing and wanting to know if it's okay, if you're all right. So you need to ask for to ask if they're okay, and then listen. So that's the first 2 things that can happen in the men's shed. And then the last one is to get help. You're not going to solve the problem. You're going to just be like what I've found with men is this huge relaxing when you ask them that and you say, "Are you okay?" And they go, "No, I'm not." And you can just see them deflate because now they've got somebody like that tension comes out of their body, and then they breathe in, and then they start to share. And that's really the very first step. And then coming back one last time to the concept of men's sheds with suicide prevention, there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. People can have an awful lot of people around them all the time and feel very lonely. And some people can be very comfortable by themselves and not have that sense of loneliness. And when men come to the shed, I think that one of the main driving factors to get them through the door is that sense of loneliness. So that was just my thoughts from what Philip had to say. And I'll just tend that back to you, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. You made a lot of great points there. The primary one being that trust is so important in building up trust so that then men can move into brave space. And it brought to mind in my shed, a man after attending about 3 or 4 times, he actually opened up and now that he got to know us, said, "I want you guys to know that I am I am sometimes feeling isolated and depressed, and I'd like you to look out for me, watch for it. I'll be distracted or I won't be here. Please check up on me." So that took a lot of nerve on his part, but he had to build up the trust in order to say that. So I really like your term. And then he was brave enough to say it. And courage is working through fear. So much appreciate that part. And as the guys in the shed get to know each other, that's how trust does build up. And we start talking shoulder to shoulder about things, and eventually it builds into face to face, but it takes a while. So thanks for that, Richard. My apologies again for my Zoom, my picture fading in and out. I'll keep monitoring it and I'll keep checking back. And if I fade out again, it won't be for very long. Our next speaker who is up is Lon Jones. And I'm just realizing we're all from Alberta. Did I say that before? But anyway, and many of us from Edmonton. Lon is a Buddy Up spokesman. And that is through the Canadian Mental Health Association. He'll talk more about that. And Men's Sheds Canada is one of the Buddy Up champions. Lon will and could speak about how sheds already make it a priority to foster a sense of community, which is what we've been talking about, and to create the connections that are necessary to have open and honest conversations. How those conversations could make use of Buddy Up tools to bring the discussion about suicide into the open is something that Lon may talk about, and he'll talk about what those tools look like and how men can access them. So straight over to you, Lon.
Thank you, Brian. It's wonderful to be able to be here. I think part of my focus, though, Brian, will be to build upon what my wonderful colleagues here have already said. I will, of course, shamelessly plug the buddyyup.ca website for everyone to go and visit all of the wonderful tools, and I will allude to some of them, but I think this conversation is more visceral and more grounded, and I'd like to stay in that tone, if that's okay. I think one of the wonderful things for me about being not just connected to Men's Sheds for the many years that I have, which has been an absolute joy and privilege, but the more I have the opportunity to connect with leaders in those areas for Men's Sheds, is that I have to speak less and less about the awareness components because they're brought forward from a grounded level from people who are involved, and it's wonderful to see. So many of the things that I'm going to share, I will just share very briefly, because both yourself and Richard and Phil have already shared some of these wonderful key pieces. But it continues to be a striking thing for me that suicide continues to be a leading cause of preventable death in Canada, with men in particular, in the middle-aged category being disproportionately affected. And despite its prevalence and our efforts, it continues to remain to be one of the most difficult topics to discuss, which is often, continues to be shrouded in stigma and silence and difficulty. And I think one of the wonderful shifts that's happening as both Richard and Phil shared, is that there is a shift towards sharing our wisdom and our experience, our willingness to be vulnerable and to create those safe spaces in order to be able to do that. And it's absolutely wonderful to see. And so, you know, I'll share a little bit from that perspective about why it's difficult to talk about suicide from my perspective. And it's been mentioned already, there's huge stigma and silence still. It's often surrounded by shame and misunderstanding. There's often a socialization component for us as men in particular, not to talk about our emotions, mask them, you know, your stress or dealing with emotional pain and sometimes harmful behaviors and actions that sometimes include suicide instead of reaching out and seeking for help. I think that that's a fantastic way that this conversation is helping to destigmatize the conversation by saying it's okay to talk about it. There is a safe place to do that. There is a structured organization that's working very diligently in order to create those safe spaces for us to be able to do that. And it is populated with people who are brave and courageous and who are willing to share those things. I think that mentorship is critically important for us all. Because it's often very challenging to know how to recognize a buddy who's maybe struggling and how to help, which is one of the resources that Buddy Up can provide, or how to start a conversation and how to keep it going, which is another resource that is there. And then to create those safe spaces to promote that overall message of reaching out and supporting your buddies. And so Buddy Up would be happy to provide mensheds or to continue to provide mensheds with any resources that we can in order to help make having those conversations easier. But there's also one thing that I did want to mention that I don't feel has been mentioned just yet, and that there's a fear of making it worse if we talk about it. And that's not something that the research supports. Research absolutely supports that having these open conversations with each other prevents suicide. It does not implant the idea, which makes it even more wonderful to see that the conversations are happening and that people are willing to be courageous. And so just to build on some of the importance, why it's important to talk about, I mean, we are very intentionally, clearly shifting the culture towards the protective factors that prevent suicide. Normalizing the conversation being one of them, reducing the stigma, encouraging more individuals to seek help, creating resources so that there is places for them to go to get that help, and then helping them to connect with it. And every time we have a conversation just like this one or similar, we create informed ways to reduce the stigma around that conversation. And there's some key protective factors that I think that are really important that we are encouraging by doing this. Tendency to look for support when it's needed in a much upstream prevention kind of way, as opposed to an intervention kind of way, which is oftentimes where it ends up becoming, where we're doing an intervention. Comfortable showing expression and emotion. It was at a men's shed gathering where I first heard that it was okay to say, I love another man. It was a shocking revelation and a wonderful thing to be a party to. And I will forever be grateful to men's sheds for that opportunity to learn and grow in that way. To be positive and supportive and have those close relationships, those connections, not just with other men, but with our families and our friends and our coworkers and our community, wherever these wonderful men's sheds grow. Because I think it's important to share it. We're not a homogenous group. We're different everywhere that we go, whether we're in Grand Prairie or Fort Mac or Edmonton or Calgary or wherever we are across the world. There are cultural differences, and I think it's important to honor those things and to have men feeling empowered in those spaces to embrace those cultural changes and differences and celebrate each other. So, I mean, at the heart of it, for me, what I'm hearing very strongly is at the heart of it, connection saves lives. Having these open conversations about suicide absolutely reduces isolation and helps individuals to access support earlier. Initiatives such as men's sheds, of course, and like Buddy Up as well, are making these efforts to counter these cultural trends and encourage men to reach out, have informed conversations, most specifically in an authentic kind of way, emphasizing all the way that peer support really is perhaps one of the most foundational and important ways that we can support each other. There is, of course, a place for structured resources or for formal resources, but we're powerful in ourselves, together, out in community, and we are oftentimes the ones that are most connected to be able to be aware that there is something that needs to be said, or that there is a change in a person that we love or care for before a formal resource would be aware that that's the case. And so I think in many ways we are the front line to that. And I'm grateful to each of you and everyone out there who's willing to do that, to reach out and just ask. Because I think ultimately silence costs lives. And so it's important that we don't avoid the topic of suicide and that we do seize and create opportunities to do prevention and support. So just in quick conclusion, I'm just very grateful to each of you for sharing your stories today, for MenShed's continued efforts to create safe spaces for men to gather and to support each other in a good way, and for their support, of course, in joining Buddy as champion.
Yeah, thanks, Lon. You said a number of things that inspired me. One is that you reiterated, of course, that there's still a stigma of silence to overcome. It's awkward. Suicide is an awkward topic for me and for many men. And yet you said there's a shift towards sharing our wisdom. So the fact is, I've known a half a dozen men who've taken their life. I don't want that knowledge, but I have it. So it leads me it inspires me to actually reach out occasionally, and when I think it might be helpful. So that's the wisdom that I guess I've gained. I like what you said about, and as we get together, we celebrate each other and the value of peer support. So when I'm going to use an example. If I go to a psychologist and I say I'm depressed and isolated, he might say, well, you should do something purposeful and take some medication. If I say it in a group of peers and another guy says, yeah, I feel that way too. Wow, the weight is lifted by a half. I'm not alone. So the power of peer support is really powerful. And that's one of the wonderful things about MenSheds, is that we are together. And rarely, if one of us has an issue, we probably know all about it. We've probably been there. And that's a real antidote to feeling isolated and misunderstood. So wonderful conversation today. It did not go perfectly. We had technical issues. We could probably talk about this for another hour. And that's not the point today. The point really is about starting the discussion. I'm more committed now to actually bringing this topic up in my shed. And I'm going to encourage other guys, other shedders that I know, that, hey, let's have a conversation. Let's start the conversation. We have now the organization to do this, to promote this kind of discussion. And on September the 10th, we'll be talking about this, or we'll have talked about this topic. Very, very important topic. And I actually, when asked the question to myself, is it worth reaching out to this guy and saying something or not? Do I care about him? And the impression that I think he'll get is I care enough to ask. And that's what I want him to know. So thank you guys for the conversation. Punch, I noticed you just came out of, you just turned on your camera. Would you like to add anything to the conversation?
I just want to thank you guys. It was an amazing conversation and very, very personal, and it exceeded my expectations. So thank you.
Well, thanks for organizing this, Punch, and inspiring us to have the conversation. I hope it's the first of many. And I also know that Phil talked about grieving and loss, and that's a whole other topic, that I don't do. I may be typical. I don't grieve very well. I'd rather hide the loss and the vulnerability of losing things than talk about it. So lots of conversations to be had. Really appreciate you guys all joining us today. I was happy to be here, and I've really gotten something positive out of this, and I hope we carry that energy forward. So thanks everyone, and thanks again to Punch for organizing this discussion. And this is really this has been co-hosted or co-organized by MenSheds Canada and Alberta MenShed Association and CMHA. And Phil, your personal involvement, your story is very powerful. So thank you all. And we'll end it there.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
You're welcome. What a
Good
joy.
job. Good job.
Yeah, that was good. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Philip. That was a great introduction.
Amazing.
Okay.
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 Other than the,
I want to express my appreciation for being part of this.
oh yeah. Well, thank you, Phil. We got to figure out why I am hardwired into the internet. I shouldn't have shaky, my video should not be dropping in and out. And Richard, you froze up for 10 seconds. So that's too bad, but just technology.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, have a great day.
Okay.
Okay.
See ya.
Hey, take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
everyone. See
Oh,
you.
and when we're going to use this, we haven't decided yet, but it'll be in September. So we'll all be engaged in how Punch is going to roll this out.
Let me know
Is
if there's anything I
there,
can do.
is there still an intention around the 10th of September, or now we looking at a date sometime later?
Sometime later.
Yeah. Okay.
I just have a conflict. Menchets Canada is putting on a big conversation with the Movember people.
Yeah.
And they didn't want me to defuse it by doing a second presentation.
Yeah, understand.
Okay.
Okay, great. All right, take care.
Thanks, guys.
Take care all.